If you try to eat healthily and eat organic to avoid GMOs in your food, did you know that there's one common GMO food that is ubiquitous and in nearly every food, even if you're trying to avoid those sorts of bad foods? It's frequently in your food, on your table, or in your cupboard. Find out about what that is and more about how to eat well and eat organic with our today's conversation with Dr. Sina McCullough, who to talk about her new book, Hands Off My Food: How to Defend Health and Freedom. Welcome to the Tenpenny Files, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you know we cover a wide range of topics to solidify your beliefs, offer solutions, and introduce you to amazing products through conversations with authors and documentary filmmakers that challenge the mainstream narrative. My goal is to introduce you to topics that you've never heard of before, or topics you always wanted to explore but you didn't know where to begin. Let the guests at the Tenpenny Files show you the way through their books and their films. Join me Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern on the Tenpenny Files as we hear from voices who've often been ignored, censored, or silenced, but they truly have something important to say. Before we begin today's episode, I want to invite everyone to become a Tenpenny Prime member, and please join us. Learn more by going to primemembership.drtenpenny.com, primemembership.drtenpenny.com, where Prime members get exclusive monthly content and educational presentations. We hope that you'll join us and support our work. And one last thing. We welcome all of our growing number of new listeners and are grateful for all of you that have been following us and listening here for a while. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and with much gratitude. So now let's get started. Today's conversation is with an expert in nutrition and functional medicine, Dr. Sina McCullough, to talk about her new book, Hands Off My Food: How to Defend Health and Freedom, the book that shows you how federal policies and global agreements have chipped away at transparency and the quality of our food. Dr. Sina, thank you so much for joining me here today on the Tenpenny Files. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is really a blessing.
Well, I love the title of your book. It just says everything, doesn't it? Hands Off My Food. And you start with your book with a personal story, and that is really heartfelt in your book about how you reversed chronic autoimmune disease when conventional medicine had no answers. At a time when so many people across the country are experiencing chronic illness and they can't get any recovery, but it must be manages. What did you do in your healing journey to teach us about the body's ability to heal itself, and where can people begin?
Oh, such a great question. I mean, you're right. The number of people with chronic and autoimmune diseases has skyrocketed. It's estimated that 75% of adults in America and about 30% of children now suffer from at least one chronic condition. And what really upsets me is that we have a medical system that tells you you can't heal, that you can't reverse these conditions. The best they can do is try to manage your symptoms. And if you're lucky, you can maybe get into remission, which is just a state of fear, right? You live in fear thinking that if I eat the wrong thing or I stress too much, the disease will come back. But what I found in my journey is that that is actually all a lie, that all chronic and autoimmune conditions are reversible. And in fact, if I wrote an article about this, so you can go on my website, it's free on my blog, and I've documented one peer-reviewed study after the next that tells you that all of these chronic conditions are reversible. So we're talking about heart disease, lupus, Lyme, autism, Hashimoto's, cancers. All of them have been documented to be reversed. And I'm talking about peer-reviewed studies, right? What we call like the gold standard, the best of the best have been published saying that you can reverse these. So I learned this the hard way because I sought help from medical doctors for over 30 years, got bounced around from one specialist to the next. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And so finally, the last specialist I saw told me that it had to be in my head.
Oh, wow.
That's, I know, right? This is such a common story now. This was probably over 15 years ago that this happened to me. But my point is, they are not equipped to help you to reverse chronic and autoimmune conditions. The medical system is fantastic at acute care. So if you get
Absolutely.
shot, I'm not going to rub an herb on it. Like, I mean, I might, but I'm going to be going to the hospital while I'm doing that, but they're not trained how to reverse chronic and autoimmune diseases, nor do many of them believe it's possible because their medical curriculum doesn't cover that. So what I found was when I was at my rock bottom, we tried everything. And I was so weak and tired that I couldn't get out of the bed. Like I really reached this tipping point where I couldn't stand up very long. It hurt to sit up even. And every time I breathed, it felt like my ribs were going to crack. I couldn't wrap my hand around a cup. Like I couldn't hold the cup. My son, who was 5 at the time, had to come and hold a cup to my mouth with a straw just so I can
Wow.
drink. And so every morning my husband would go to work and he would help me down the stairs. And I'd basically lay there on the floor and I would listen to, at the time, it was all these cutting edge free online health summits. And that's what I did 40 to 60 hours a week, every single week. I'm listening to these health summits because I'm trying to not die. I realized it was up to me to figure this out. So I'm trying to put the pieces together. And what happened was that morning, I was too weak to even move the sheet off my body.
Wow.
And I remember just crying because my husband and I knew that if we couldn't turn it around, I wouldn't be there to see my children grow up. Like they wouldn't have a mother. And so basically, I just surrendered everything over to God. And I just told him, I've tried everything that I know, all my educational background. I mean, I'm supposed to be an expert in food, and I couldn't figure out what to eat to save my life. And I just said, if you save me so that my children don't have to grow up without a mother, then I'll spend the rest of my life helping your children. So that is my mission. That's what I do now is I'm trying to spread the word of hope that don't believe the mainstream narrative. You can reverse it. God led me to a functional medicine practitioner who taught me about functional testing. I only knew Western testing. And we did those tests, and I'll tell you the impact that it makes when you find a real, actual good test. In the Western doctor's office, they said I had no micronutrient deficiencies, zero. When I did this functional micronutrient deficiency test, I showed up with 15 micronutrient deficiencies. I was so deficient in 2B vitamins, I was borderline for both beriberi and pellagra, which are
Wow.
both diseases that were largely eradicated in the US by the mid 1900s, and they both can lead to death. And the crazy thing is, the scary part is, before my first job out of college, I was director of research and development for a supplement company. I formulated supplements. So I was consuming the best of the best, like including the best of the best multivitamin and mineral. I was still deficient in 15 nutrients. So that is one example of the difference that a test can make. I also showed up positive for arsenic, and which came from consuming what I thought were certified gluten-free foods. Most of them that contain rice contain arsenic in them that came largely from the pesticides that have been used that intentionally contained arsenic. Chickens were fed arsenic at some point too, help fatten them up. So I had the arsenic poisoning, I had the micronutrient deficiencies, and I had leaky gut, of course. Like who doesn't these days, with the condition of the food supply. So I had all of that, and I had an advanced stage of rheumatoid arthritis, is what we figured out in my 30s.
Wow.
So it was crazy. I had muscle wasting like a cancer patient would experience. I was eating almost constantly, and I lost 15 pounds in a month, even though I would literally put salt, real salt, on avocado and scoop it and eat it. And I still couldn't stop the weight loss. So it was very severe. Like I lost half my hair. I had 5 miscarriages, sensitivities to so many foods. Like the foods I can eat dwindled down to half a sheet of paper. Foods like apples, bananas, chicken were making me sick. I mean, these are foods that we think of as healthy. Another thing that shocked me in this journey that could help somebody else who is struggling is that, I was trained as a PhD in nutrition, how to do diet elimination reintroduction. And I figured out basically that half sheet of paper of foods that I could eat, but I couldn't figure out the final couple food triggers that were making me sick because the symptoms weren't obvious. I didn't know that you can eat a bite of a food and have a symptom 3 weeks later. I didn't realize that at the time. And so what happened was I took a food chemical sensitivity test and I showed up positive, the most severe sensitivity you can have to chicken and bay leaf,
Wow.
which is crazy. You wouldn't like, why are we becoming sensitive to spices, and herbs? So that I developed, we think, because one of the many diets that I tried during this journey was the GAPS diet. And I love Dr. McBride, love her. We're good friends. But what happened was my gastrointestinal tract didn't heal while I was on the GAPS diet. And so I'm drinking all this broth that I made using chicken bones and added bay leaf to it. So I induced a sensitivity in myself by consuming so much of one food while I still had a leaky gut.
When I read through your whole section about in the first part of your book, because I read all the books that of all my guests that come on this show. So I get to read 5 books a week, which is really pressing me to read faster. But when I read through that section of your book about the extreme sensitivities, I had to wonder, have you ever heard of or are you familiar with NAET? Um,
Mm,
because
no.
it stands for Nambutropod's allergy elimination technique. I've been doing it in my practice here in Cleveland since 1998. And we developed our own form of that called SRT, which makes it a little bit faster and a little bit more thorough. But you use muscle testing and muscle testing, homeopathic vials, and acupressure on specific points on your back, arm, and legs, and it removes all sensitivities. And I mean, we even have kids that were anaphylactic to peanuts that can now eat nuts. We've had adults that were anaphylactic to fish that can now eat fish. It cleans up your whole immune system. It's like cleaning out your lymphatics. And I'm just wondering if it was something that could even help along the way. Because it's one of the things that we're kind of famous for at Tenpenny Integrated Medical Center. We've had people from 18 countries and almost all 50 states come to our clinic to get treated by this sensitivity reduction technique that we do, which is sort of an offshoot from NAET. NAET is bigger. It's naet.com for the listener if you want to look into that. And they have practitioners literally all over the world. Dr. Devi has actually even created a way to treat animals when they have the severe eczema and rashes from the horrible foods that they eat. So it doesn't replace what you've done in terms of cleaning up the food and getting all that stuff out. But in the meantime, while you're going through that, and when people still have residual things that they're still allergic to, it's definitely a technique that can help.
That sounds fantastic. So I've been fully healed for 10 years, just over 10
Mhm.
years. So everything that I had was fully reversed, including all the food sensitivities.
Yeah.
And I have no markers of inflammation in my body. And what I think is fascinating, and I'm going to look into what you said, and I'm all about using your intuition. Like you mentioned the muscle testing. So tapping into your intuition. And my girlfriend taught me how to do the muscle testing because I didn't know about that either. And I just so happened to pick up on it quickly. I think in my experience, the more intuitive you are, the more you've practiced kind of that muscle, let's say, the easier it is for somebody to pick it up. And so now I don't rely on tests. I actually ask my body before every meal, what do you want to eat? Which helps me to stay healthy and thriving. In fact, so I'm 50 now, and at the age of 45, I gave birth to my third child, and she is my healthiest of all three of my children. And
Wow.
I mean, and think about it. People are saying like, oh, by the time you hit 35, you shouldn't have any more kids because the odds of having some genetic problem increases exponentially. And that's another thing, just trying to keep us living in fear. Like that's not true. So we're just defying the odds here, and we're showing people that you can have hope and just don't buy into it, because what you believe becomes your reality. right?
Absolutely.
So when I first got the diagnosis, it was truly incredible to me because, I went almost my whole life with no one knowing what was wrong. I just had all of these symptoms and they were getting really, really bad. But it wasn't until somebody actually gave me a diagnosis that I felt like a ton of bricks hit me. Like I just been handed a death sentence. And it was incredible because I credit that moment as the turning point. I literally could have gone down that rabbit hole of, oh, I'm sick and identifying with it and not healing, or I could have healed. So what happened was I got the diagnosis finally. I called my husband at work. I'm totally sobbing. And I said, oh my goodness, you're not going to believe it. And he's like, what happened? And I'm literally like, I have a disease. Like, even though I had all these symptoms, I'm literally laying on the floor and muscle wasting in my mind, I was going to be okay. We were going to figure it out. But as soon as somebody labeled it as a chronic autoimmune disease, I fell into that pattern, that mental pattern that, oh, this is not curable. I'm going to have to carry this label around with me for the rest of my
Wow.
life, and it's only going to get worse. And my husband immediately said to me, nothing has changed from the moment before you got the diagnosis to this very moment. Nothing changed. You have to be stronger than the diagnosis. And I was like, whoa, he's right. So you know what I did? I never accepted the diagnosis. It never became part of me. I
That's
always
really
said,
great. That's really important to tell people you're not defined by a name. Kierkegaard said in the 1800s, once you label me, you negate me. And so once you label a disease, it's like it doesn't matter anymore. And any other new symptom you have, oh, it's just because of your disease. So that's really good for that you kind of tapped into that. I want to move on to a little bit of stuff that you talk about in your book, Hands Off My Food, where you define pharmaceutical crops as plants that have been genetically engineered to grow medicine as food. And it really, pharmaceutical crops sounds like science fiction. How is this real? And what should families be aware of?
yes. So I'm so glad you asked because this is largely not talked about. So for about 30 years, since around 1998, America has been growing medicine in open fields across the country. And I don't think people really understand what that means. They're not grown in greenhouses, right? And a lot of these crops that are actually growing things inside of them, like antigens, like components of vaccines. Like people have heard of the COVID vaccine being grown in lettuce. A lot of times we're finding out they are not contained in these greenhouses. They are grown out in open fields. So if you have something, for example, like corn, which is a common crop that they're growing these medications in, corn can cross pollinate. And it can also like drift, right? The pollen can be picked up by insects and animals in the wind, and it can drift for miles away from it. So it's a huge issue. And the problem is we have corn, rice, even lettuce that are all being engineered to turn out vaccines, pharmaceutical drugs, and other medical compounds right then and there in the cell. So if it gets cross-pollinated, if an animal comes and picks up kernels and puts it in a different field, we can now have medicine growing in multiple open fields. And they're using the same corn that we eat as food. And if you go out to these cornfields, they don't look like pharmaceutical crops. They look like food crops. So,
Wow.
so if you get a corn, like a pharma crop contaminated in one of our food crops, you can't really tell. You have to test it to be able to tell. So we've already had examples of cross-contamination that's already occurred. And one of them was the Prodigy scandal. This was back in 2002. So another evidence, this is well documented. The government has even documented this. It tells you how far back this goes. Prodigy genetically engineered corn to produce a vaccine for pigs. It
Wow.
happened to contaminate 500,000 bushels of soybeans. This was in Nebraska. It was $2.7 million worth of crops. They had
Wow.
to destroy it. the same land that was used to grow the genetically engineered pig vaccine was then used to grow soybeans for human consumption. And that corn grew amongst the soybeans. So that's how they found it, is that it was just a different crop. Otherwise, if it was still corn, who would have found it? It would have been consumed. That same year in Iowa, Prodigy also had corn that contaminated 155 acres of a cornfield. That corn had to be burned. At that time, Prodigy had received 85 test permits for experimental open air trials of genetically engineered pharmaceutical and chemical crops. It was across at least 96 different locations.
Wow.
So again, the problem is we don't know how many crops there are on like that are being grown. If you look at the USDA's website, because the USDA is one that's supposed to grant the permits for these outdoor trials, their information is heavily redacted in these permits. So I went through each permit and pulled the information I could find. And what it did confirm is that there's multi-state activity from California, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, North Carolina, North Dakota, Washington, Kentucky, Arkansas, Minnesota, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Texas. Now, I contacted the USDA and I asked, can you tell me any more information here? This has been redacted. We have the right to know if our food crops are being grown next to these open field trials of pharmaceutical crops. They told me I had to submit a Freedom of Information request. And we know where that goes. They're supposed to respond within 28 days of a FOIA request. The average response is 278 days.
Wow.
And the typical response is a note acknowledging they received your request and they've begun a search. And in fact, in 2023, the government agencies received nearly 1.2 million FOIA requests.
Wow.
2/3 of them were redacted, withheld, or denied. Only 16% of those requests were actually fully granted.
Wow.
So we have no idea, but we do know some are already on the market. There's a few plant-made products that are already being sold. These are mostly reagents or processing enzymes like trypsin, recombinant avidin, endocellulase. But what's concerning to me is on the horizon, there's a hepatitis B booster that's on the horizon. It's being manufactured by Applied Biotechnology Institute. They've engineered the hepatitis B booster vaccine into corn. It could be the first edible hepatitis B booster to reach the market. They've done the preclinical trials. It's ready to go. They just need to test it in humans. And then there's Brazine, and then there's aprotinin, which are, less concerning to me. But this hepatitis B booster is on my radar, and I'm following that one diligently.
Well, I have a whole folder. It's probably a little outdated now of all the different edible vaccines they've tried over the years. And one of the reasons that they were never able to bring them to market had to do with dose. I mean, if you want to get a hepatitis B booster, and let's just say, for example, it's grown in a head of lettuce. Well, what if you eat salad every day for like 3 months? Are you getting multiple doses? Are you getting 90 doses of the hepatitis B vaccine? And they were not able to figure that out. Have they figured that out?
No. So I actually interviewed the president, couple presidents of these different pharma crop companies. And I asked that very same question. I said, because one of the companies is trying to vaccinate wildlife against COVID. So they created this vaccine and they're working with the government on this. And their idea is to put them in these feed pellet stations. And the wild animals would come up and eat the pellets and get vaccinated. And my first question was, well, how do you control how many pellets they eat? And the president of this pharmaceutical company said to me, well, that's not our job. That's the job of the government. So then
Wow.
I contacted the government and I said, hey, you have a grant with this company. This is how you guys are feeding the wildlife. They're saying it's not their job to figure out how the dosage is going to, be laid out. They're saying it's your job. And they told me that they're going to have to get back to me on it, that they didn't have the answer. It's been like 8 months. Like I'm not holding my breath. Right. So then when I talked to the president of another company, and is growing vaccines in corn. And what they do is they grow it in the corn, and then they basically dehydrate it and they grind it up and they put it in wafers. And I said, well, how do you know how many dosages somebody should consume? And he said that in worst case, you just get an extra dose of it. Like, it's not a big deal.
My
Yeah.
goodness.
The Tennessee governor actually signed a bill into law. I think it was HB 1894. They required in Tennessee that foods containing vaccines or vaccine materials would be labeled as actual pharmaceutical drugs. And the reason that state stepped up and did that, it was in response to UC Riverside. They have a research project where they're trying to create an edible vaccine through the mRNA added to spinach and lettuce. And their long-term goal, the researchers themselves stated, the long-term goal was for people to grow these vaccine-producing plants in their own garden, where a single plant would produce enough mRNA to vaccinate a single person. Wow. So again, the people who are behind this are not concerned about you having too many doses of a vaccine, because they have a different mindset. And that was one of the things that really struck me when I talked. You can do all the research you want and like online from behind your computer, and you can get so angry, right? Because of what they're doing. And it just seems absurd to you and I that we would be doing this to our food crops, right? When you talk to these people, like I had the privilege of talking to the presidents of those companies, they are, in my opinion, I saw them as they're good people. They think that they are doing good. They think that they are doing a service for our culture and the world. They truly believe that this is the answer and that they're not doing anything that could hurt us. Hence, their conclusion that if you consume more of that lettuce than you actually need is not a bad thing, because they bought into that narrative that we need vaccines.
Yeah, well, isn't that the case? And we're going to need to take a quick break here, Sina, from our station. But, it reminds me of Aaron Series' book, Vaccines, Amen, about the religion of vaccinology and how that people that buy into it, it really is a religion and there's no bumping them off of it. So hold that thought right there, because this is extremely interesting and very important. We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors for AmericaOutloud.news. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays the Tenpenny Files on the iHeartRadio network Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen anywhere in the world from the AmericaOutloud.news media player. If you've missed any of these great conversations, you can find them all over the internet under on all of our platforms on X, Instagram, Rumble, and now also on YouTube. You can also find them on Pandora, Spotify, Apple, TuneIn, iHeart Virtual Studios, and the best place, the easiest place, is just go to my website, which is drtenpenny.com. Hover over the podcast tab. There'll be a drop-down window that says all podcasts. We couldn't have made it any easier and any more direct for you. We also post them on my Substack at drtenpenny.substack.com, and we post our pastor and biblical author interviews on my other Substack, which is 10pennywalkwithgod.substack.com. We have a great message coming from our sponsor. Please listen. We'll be right back with more with Dr. Sina McCullough on her book, Hands Off My Food, How to Defend Health and Freedom. We will be right back. People are doing everything right these days. They're eating clean and trying to avoid toxins, and they're still not feeling well. That's because they no longer can avoid exposure. You can't avoid it. Toxins are everywhere. Things like glyphosate, heavy metals like aluminum and mercury, cadmium from cigarette smoke, they're all accumulating in your body every single day. And that buildup shows up as brain fog, fatigue, weight that won't budge, skin issues, gut problems, ADD and ADHD in our children, asthma in our kids, even accelerated aging. Detox is no longer optional. It's something your body needs to do every day. We recommend as a first step this detox spray because it works at a cellular level to bind and remove toxins from the body. It's safe for the whole family, from infants to grandparents. I even give it to my dog. Go to drtdetox.com and get started today. First-time customers can get up to 82% off on your first bottle because exposures aren't slowing down. and your health shouldn't either. In fact, you should be getting well.
Well, only when the government bows to the people will America become great again. This is Malcolm Out Loud here. Join me in pushing back against censorship, my fellow Americans. Right at the top of AmericaOutloud.news are the words, many voices, one freedom, united in the First Amendment. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. AmericaOutloud.news, liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Today's conversation is already so interesting, and we've got more to come with Dr. Sina McCullough on her book, Hands Off My Food, How to Defend Health and Freedom, the book that shows how federal policies and global agreements have chipped away at transparency and the quality of our food. We have a lot more to cover here. I've got so many questions for you. I want to get down to the source, but I would just want to say that she is the co-author of Beyond Labels and Beyond Labels podcasts, and she does a world-renowned podcast with our favorite farmer, Joel Salatin. She's also the creator of Go Wild online program, a roadmap for reversing chronic and autoimmune diseases. Dr. Sina, thank you so much for being on the show today. We've got so many things that I want to cover. I want to start with, what is the biggest myth that people believe about FDA approval?
Oh, that they are approving things. Like, I mean, so I'll give you an example. So many people by now, because of Kennedy, have heard of the GRAS loophole, which is generally recognized as safe. So the GRAS loophole actually came out of the 1958 Food Additive Amendment. It has allowed thousands of laboratory designed chemicals to enter our food supply with pretty much no oversight from the FDA. So how that works is a company can simply hire an expert, someone who they deem to be an expert. And that expert, all they have to do is declare that a chemical that company made is safe. And once that expert says that it's safe, that chemical can go directly into our food supply. There's no testing by the FDA. The FDA doesn't even have to be notified that the company has put a chemical in our food supply. And even Secretary Kennedy has admitted that we don't know how many chemicals are in the food supply. We're estimating that there's around 10,000 chemicals in the food supply, and about 99% of all the chemicals added since 2000 were added through this GRAS loophole. Now, here's the part that really got me. The process, like I said, of notifying the FDA that a new chemical is in our food is voluntary. But guess who made that process voluntary? The FDA.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so the FDA itself. Now, this will really drive this point home of why everyone should know about the GRAS loophole and how the FDA works. Most people have heard of genetically modified organisms, GMOs. And most of us think, okay, well, you're changing the genetic makeup of an animal or of a plant. Certainly, the government did testing on GMOs before they allow them into our food supply. No, the FDA presumed, quote, presumed that GMOs were GRAS. That means they didn't test them. There's no long-term testing. There's no safety testing that they did. The companies determined if the GMOs were safe. So, for example, you have corn that was genetically modified with bacteria to produce a pesticide in it. This is BT corn. The vast majority, 90-something% of the corn grown on American soil is BT corn. And it's, by the way, sprayed with glyphosate. This is never been really fully tested. It's never been adequately toxicity tested or tested for long-term safety, yet it's in over 90% of our corn crops today. And it got on the market because the FDA presumed that it was GRAS. So one thing that people don't realize is when they hear that, what I just mentioned to you, they get outraged and they're like, why isn't the FDA doing their job? I thought the same thing when I was researching this book. So I contacted the Government Accountability Office, the GAO, which is supposed to be our watchdog over all the government agencies. And I said, hey, what's going on here? Isn't the FDA supposed to be testing our food for safety? I mean, they tout that they do that. They make sure it's safe. Well, the GAO said Congress messed up. That when Congress passed this food additive amendment, they did not declare who was responsible for testing these chemicals for safety. They were not responsible for determining who these experts would be, who would determine these chemicals were safe. So in that leadership vacuum, the company stepped up and they started self-certifying their products. So here's the other missing piece, and this ties into Secretary Kennedy. Most people don't understand our role in our food supply. Okay. Our role was established when the FDA, the federal FDA, was born in 1906. People have misplaced expectations on Secretary Kennedy. A lot of people are upset with him. Like he's not following through with his promises, because these people were waiting for this top-down savior to swoop in and heal our food supply. But that's not actually how the system was set up. So back in 1906, when we got the FDA, it was actually set up based on three pillars of our now national food laws. Those pillars are, number one, the manufacturer must prove safety. So from the beginning, it was set up that the companies were designed to prove the safety of their own products. It was not the FDA's job to test it and make sure that they were safe. The second food law pillar is that the FDA is responsible for transparency of labels. That's the job of the FDA, to make sure the label is transparent and accurate. The third pillar, which is the most important part, is the consumer is the final judge. So while all three of these pillars have in essence crumbled, right? I mean, we have companies granting their own, safety of their own chemicals. We have labels that are full of secrets and lies, which I uncover in the book. We have a public that's been lulled into a false sense of security, right? But the issue is we're not understanding our role, that if we don't like what's in the food, if we don't like how it's making us sick, we are supposed to speak with our dollars. That's why the food supply in Europe is largely different than the food supply here in these other countries. They've banned a lot of the chemicals that we allowed in our food because their citizens stood up and said, we're not going to eat that. Americans have not done that. We've been lulled into this false sense of security that we have this FDA, EPA, and USDA paid with our tax dollars that are saying they're protecting our food. And so we think that they are, but they're not. And so we have, in 1906, that's how I describe it, this veil of unearned trust fell over our eyes with the creation of the FDA. You had the media that was complicit as well. They plastered all over, newspapers across the country. The purity and safety of our food is, quote, guaranteed. So we were lulled into this false sense of security, and we've passed down that veil like a family heirloom from generation to generation. And that's how we have the food supply that we have today. Kennedy cannot completely fix this food supply for us. He can't even close that grass loophole because Congress is the one that created it. Legally, Congress has to close that loophole. So I think what's happening here is I praise Kennedy because, in some ways, because he has brought an unprecedented level of awareness of the adulteration of our food supply. We have 20-something-year-olds now flipping over the cans of soda and reading a food label for the first time in their lives. That is his biggest accomplishment, and it probably will always be his biggest accomplishment. The unfortunate part is that getting him in that position as Secretary of HHS has lowered the veil over people's eyes again, many people's eyes, and they're waiting for this top-down savior, and they're getting disappointed and disenchanted by it instead of realizing their power, the power that they have to move the market and harnessing that ability and really shifting the market and turning this ship around. Because when you speak with your dollars, you move the market for every single person who buys that food, right? And companies respond to the dollar.
I think that's so important. And that's a whole lot to unpack of what you just said there in that 12-minute a monologue that you just did there. So,
Sorry, I get excited.
so one of the things that is, I want to bring out a couple of things, and I don't want to run short on time here. But one of the things is what you mentioned about the mislabeling and the hidden ingredients. You know, they came out with new food labeling laws about 3 years ago with bioengineered ingredients and how they were to be labeled and not labeled. And if you had a certain ratio of it was less than, it didn't need to be on. And there was all of these loopholes of things like schools and factories and dog food and food trucks and all these different things that didn't need to label all these bioengineered ingredients. And they needed to be on the label in the order of which they appear. And if they don't appear above a certain percent, they don't need to be there at all. And
That's
so
right.
so the food labeling has gotten even much more deceptive. And you talk about that a lot in your book, Hands Off Our Food. Give us just a couple of minutes on why that is so dangerous.
Yeah. So what I have found in my research is when you have like these labeling, corruption, mislabeling of things, a lot of times this is intentional. And when we see this mislabeling, that's a nice way to say it, it's predominantly because of the revolving door. So you have just a handful of people in certain government positions that are influenced by industry. And so they are creating kind of loopholes and watering down labels, like we saw with the genetically engineered label, the bioengineered label. So one example of that is most people are familiar with recombinant bovine growth hormone, RBGH. It's basically it was the first genetically engineered drug allowed in our food supply. It was given to cows to make them produce more milk. And people found out about it and they got upset. One of the reasons why people found out is because on your milk label, it will say things like FDA declares there's no significant difference between RBGH treated and non-RBGH treated cows, right? Well, we know that there is a difference between the milk. If the cow was treated with this genetically engineered hormone, we know that it's linked to increases in cancers, not to mention making the cow sicker. So in that process, that the Monsanto was the company at the time making RBGH. They used 2 industry-sponsored rat studies to tell the FDA that it was safe. The FDA scientists themselves repeatedly warned that RBGH could endanger public health. The GAO advised against approving it. When cows got sick because of the drug and they needed more antibiotics to combat things like mastitis, the FDA increased the allowable level of antibiotic residues in our milk instead of going back to Monsanto and saying, hey, your product's failing, the technology is failing, change it. No, they just exposed us to more antibiotics. And the reason it got passed and it's still on the market today, and it's actually making a comeback now, is because of 3 key players. Dr. Margaret Miller, she increased the allowable level of antibiotic residues. So get this, she worked for Monsanto, where she worked on recombinant bovine growth hormone. Then she was hired by the FDA, where she evaluated the same research that she conducted while she was at Monsanto on RBGH. You have then Dr. Suzanne Sechin. She was the primary reviewer of RBGH at the FDA. Well, she too conducted studies on RBGH for Monsanto when she was in grad school, then was immediately hired by the FDA to review her very own studies. While she worked at the FDA, she actually published articles in support of Monsanto and RBGH. Then you have Michael Taylor. Most people have heard of Michael Taylor. He was the vice president of Monsanto. Then he was the FDA deputy commissioner of policy. He wrote that label that you see on your milk. He's the one who wrote it. So you've got even just these 3 players allowed this watered down deceptive label to be put on our milk. But you know what was the most upsetting to me? This is why I talk about in my title, it's how to save your food, health, and freedom. Because when I learned this tidbit, I realized they've taken some of our freedoms and we don't even know it. So what happened was when they were going through experimental drug trials on RBGH. So this is before the FDA or any of them approved it. It wasn't approved. They were experimenting on this. And remember, it was the first genetically engineered hormone in our food supply. When they did that, they were collecting milk from these cows. They were in these drug trials, cows that were sick, and they sold it in our grocery stores with no label. So some Americans unknowingly drank this milk for 8 years
Oh,
while it was still
wow.
in the experimental phase. How did I find that out? In the Government Accountability Office's documents. They documented that the FDA did this, and they said they disagreed with this FDA policy. The FDA doesn't even think we have the right to know when there's experimental products sold in our grocery store. And you know
Wow.
what? That's still their policy today.
Wow. Reading you through your book, it's so well researched, and you've really dug into, like you said, with FOIA requests and government accounting office documents and FDA documents, EPA documents, USDA, all that stuff. You've really, really dug down into it and uncovered just scathing information about what they have done in the last 100+ years to our food. If someone is reading your book and they're feeling overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, what do I eat? I mean, how I can't eat anything, and I'm not even sure about my local rancher or my local farmer. And what about my when I go to my food market? How do I know that they really are organic because they're not really or regulated in the local food markets? And I can see where people, when reading your book, because it's so compelling and so informative about these things that need to be fixed inside of our government, that people could just get really exasperated. What is the very first small step that you want them to start with, and what do you want their takeaway to be after reading your book, Hands Off My Food?
Great question. So I felt overwhelmed as well when I was researching this, and that's how I switched to being solution oriented. After each chapter in the book where I'm exposing this corruption, I have specific solutions for that specific subject. And then the third section of the book is entirely about solutions. An easy place to start is, most of us shop in the grocery store. So if you're in the grocery store, one of the simplest things you can do is, instead of choosing conventional, choose organic. While there are still loopholes in that organic label, it's been shown time and time again to expose you to a lower toxic load than the conventional products. So I would first shift over to organic because it's simple, and then what I do is I pair the 100% USDA organic label with the non-GMO project label and the glyphosate residue free label that's put out by the Detox Project. Both of those, I call it the trio. So the one is the government label. That's the one that has all these loopholes. And I patch the holes in that label with the non-GMO project and the Detox Project's labels. Those are third-party independent labels. If they make a mistake, if they're deceptive, they can go out of business. So we can hold them accountable. We can't hold the government accountable, right? Whoever gets fired from the government or let go, or when are they ever downsized, right? Right. So that's what I do when I'm in the grocery store, is I'm trying to, if all possible, pair those three things together to just decrease the toxic burden. If you have a local farm near you, then I would go to the local farm or just call them. And you want to ask certain questions like, do you use GMOs? Do you spray with pesticides or herbicides? Simple questions. And I have those outlined in the book. What I would love people to walk away with is understanding that they have the critical role in our food supply, that it was set up with the intention of the power being with the people. The power truly does lie in the people. So if we don't like what's happening to our food, if we don't like the fact that our children are on a track to die at an earlier age than us, we can do something about it. All you have to do is harness your God-given power and choose. You give informed consent. We're all consenting to something right now. With every bite of food, with every purchase of food, we are consenting. Give informed consent. Know what is in that food and choose. I'm either going to support that company or I'm going to starve that company. It's as simple as feed the good and starve the bad.
I've said for the longest time when I would see patients in the office that the American Academy of Lifestyle Medicine has the best diet that everybody can follow. It's so simple. The first thing, it's just 3 steps or 4 steps actually. The first thing is eat real food, like what Secretary Kennedy has said. And things that come in a box, a can, or they hand out a window is not real food. So eat real food. Eat mostly fruits and vegetables, eat organic, know where your meat comes from, and eat smaller portions. And then you can always talk about water and sleep and exercise and all those different things. But just from a dietary standpoint, because people would come into my office and say, which diet should I use? Simple ones, eat real food, things like that's really
Exactly.
good. So
Yeah, and read the label. Like
we've
if you are going to eat a processed food or something with a label, read that ingredient label. If
exactly.
you can't pronounce that food or that ingredient, or you don't know where it comes from, put it back on the shelf.
Or there's more than 4 or 5 of them listed, put it back on the shelf.
That's right.
Sina, we've got about 1 minute left, so I want you to summarize for me here. I think we've done a pretty good overview of what the substance of your book is about Hands Off My Food. But why do you really think that, there's a lot of diet books and a lot of policy books out there. What sets yours apart, and why should people buy and read your book?
Great question. Well, what sets mine apart is the depth of the research. Everything is original sourced. I approached it as an investigative journalist, literally just trying to get to the truth. And so I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible. And I have a libertarian perspective. I'm in it for true transparency. Basically, God gave me that second chance, and I want to help other people find theirs. And I don't want to be somebody who's telling you what to eat, what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat. If you want to eat GMOs, that's fine. But I'm laying out the case for you to let you know that the answer is not the government. The answer is not industry. And I explain in detail why. The answer is the people. So we can disagree on what we're going to eat. That's fine. But know what you are eating. Know what message you are sending to the government and to food companies with every purchase that you make. And I think that sets my book apart. There's no shaming. There's no judgment in it. It's literally, this is what I have uncovered. Here's the sources. I tell you to even go to the source yourself. Don't trust me. Look it up for yourself and then make an informed decision. And that being an informed citizenry is how we actually reclaim our health and our freedom and reclaim it for the future of our children. And we can tell them that our food, our families, and our freedom are not for sale.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Sina McCullough, your book, Hands Off My Food, you can find it at bookstore.drtenpenny.com. We put all of our authors' books in there, so it makes it really easy for the listener to find them. I want to thank you so much for being with us here today. We're sort of short on time, so we're going to have to kind of cut out here quickly. So thank you so much for all of our listeners. Thank you for people who come here every day. But this is a really informative book, and it really nails it if you want to research what's happening to your food. So I wish everybody a great rest of your day, and we will see you here the next time, tomorrow on the Tenpenny Files. Goodbye, everybody, and God bless.